Episode 5 starts out with the aftermath from Brandy's interview. Alex is very pissed off and tells her to never question her integrity again, while Chip wants to get a meeting with her to talk about not sabotaging her own career. But that meeting comes quickly to an end when he finds out that Mitch is back in the building and demanding to talk to the staff. Chip advises Mitch to leave, but Mitch doesn't want to and says, "I've worked with these people for years. I need to address them." But the real reason why he's shown up is because there's a New York Times article that's about to come out. It's going to be pretty damning for Mitch, and he wants his former coworkers to come forward and defend him. And for whatever reason, Mitch is allowed to address the room, and it goes about as well as you'd think. Mitch is an emotional roller coaster, screaming 1 minute, but telling them that he loves them the next. And he's really just searching out somebody that will be the first one to raise their hand and say, "I'll go on the record," but no one's doing it. His last-ditch effort is to plead to Alex, his former co-anchor, but she just walks out of the room, and at this point, security's had enough, and they escort him out of the building. As he's heading into the elevator, Brandy runs in and introduces herself to Mitch and asks who knew. To which Mitch just slyly turns around and says, "What do you think?" And then gives her a piece of advice: watch your back. So while Brandy ponders what Mitch said, she heads out for coffee and she runs into Hannah and Claire. And Hannah and Claire invite her out for a birthday party that night, expecting her not to show up because she's kind of a celebrity. But to their surprise, Brandy says, yeah, she'd love to come because she doesn't really know anybody in New York. She doesn't have a lot of friends. And on top of it, her co-host, Alex, didn't invite her to this fancy charity event that she's having at her house. So Brandy's schedule is wide open for that night. But that party is tomorrow, and before she can go out and celebrate with her coworkers, she has to do an interview with a journalist named Maggie, who really covers the entertainment industry for one of the publications. And Maggie's doing an expose on Brandy, who Brandy is, where she came from, and her rise to stardom. But she's also poking around about Alex and about Mitch, obviously, and she's a very good journalist, trying to get Brandy in a little bit of a hot water situation, but she's not taking the bait. But luckily for Brandy, most people in the office don't even care about that article. Most people care about the New York Times article that's coming out. The New York Times is called the UBA office and are on a conference call with Corey, Fred, and their lawyer. And since the Ashley Brown interview aired, 4 more women have come forward, and the New York Times want a quote. But UBA wants to know what these quotes are before they themselves give a quote. And after a little bit of haggling, you learn that there's women accusing Mitch of coming onto them in bathrooms, visits to their homes. We're talking you name it, he's accused of doing it. And the cherry on top is a very damning quote from his former assistant. So Corey and Fred tried to switch out that damning quote for the story that Mitch had to be escorted off the premises of the morning show. But the Times doesn't bite, and they say we'll run the story as is, which leaves Fred irate. He turns to the lawyer and says, "You better fix this or you're going to find a new job." And then he turns his wrath onto Corey and says, nobody likes you. And what really pisses off Fred is Corey's laissez-faire attitude towards this whole situation. Corey never seems to get flustered, and he never seems to see the severity of the situation. He's just very casual with everything. And it pisses off Fred even more. Now, one of the guys that wasn't on this conference call that probably should have been was Chip, the executive producer. And Chip finds out about this conversation between Corey, Fred, the lawyers, and the New York Times because he meets with a New York Times reporter who wrote the story. And during their meeting, you find out that Chip was actually the source of the Mitch allegations that were leaked to the New York Times. And he's meeting with this guy because he wants to find out if he's going to be railroaded in this New York Times article. Apparently, Chip kind of got this guy the job, and Chip feels like he owes him that much. But the guy's not giving up the information, and Chip is now worried that he's going to lose his job. So Chip gets bombed and heads over to Alex's house, where she's hosting that upper crusty charity event that Brandy wasn't invited to. But one coworker who was invited to the event is Daniel Henderson, and he's being scouted by the competition. Audra, who is truly at this event for political purposes, and is Alex's rival, is at this event trying to tell Daniel that he's being underutilized at the morning show, and he really should come over and work for them. He's telling her that he's happy for the moment, but also the event is teaming with UBA executives, and this isn't the best place to talk. And there are some pretty important people at this event, including Corey and Fred. Now, obviously, Corey and Alex don't have the best relationship, and Corey jokes that he was only invited for political purposes. But just because he's hated by Alex doesn't mean Corey's not going to have a good time. And how could you not at this charity event that's really a bullshit charity with a very exciting silent auction like that's never been done before? And if you pay $1,000, you get to sing show tunes. This is the definition of the 1%. But Alex really doesn't care about talking to Corey or singing show tunes. She's waiting for Maggie, the journalist who was interviewing Brandy, to show up to try to poke and prod her for information on the Brandi interview. And when she does, Alex is trying to tell her off the record, but really it's on the record that Alex was the one who discovered Brandi. And it was Alex who actually saw what's best for the show, but Maggie sees right through this trying to trade information act. And Maggie takes a shot saying that, it seems like you're kind of worried that you're going to be forgotten in this whole thing because now your replacement's here. And this really pisses off Alex, and she says, well, off the record, I'm never going to be replaced. And I'm never going to be forgotten in any room whatsoever. So Chip showing up drunk with a bunch of UBA executives, his coworkers, his peers, and a journalist, not ideal. And Chip walks right up to Fred and says, I don't appreciate not being on that conference call, but Fred says, you weren't needed. And Chip says, I know how this works, right? The report from the New York Times comes out, and if it's damning, I'm not going to have a job, and you're going to put the blame on me. And Fred doesn't say anything. He just walks off. And then Chip looks at Corey and says, I just want to let you know, you're just as expendable as I am in this whole situation. And at this point, Corey's just looking for anybody else to talk to. So he sees Alex and books it over there and says, we haven't had a chance to talk since you announced Brandi as the co-host of the morning show. And the last time we talked, it wasn't a good talk, and I was pretty mean to you telling you that we bought you that award. But I got to tell you that you were right. Hiring Brandi was the right move, and I know you don't trust me, but I feel like you're an evil genius, and I like to work with evil geniuses, and I want to work with you. And her only response to this is to tell him to go fuck himself. And he says, you still don't have faith in me, do you? So he dips into his wallet, pays $1,000, and starts singing show tunes, because that's the way to win over a coworker. While singing a song that the two alluded to previously in the show, you can tell that something's spooking Alex. And as soon as it's over, she books it out of there. She leaves her husband at her own charity event to schmooze with her coworkers, but she's got to get out. She's got to leave. And he, of course, wants to know where she's going, and finally she says, I'm going to see Mitch. He's my friend, and I have to talk to him, and I need you not to make a big thing out of this, but I'm going to see Mitch. And this gives you a pretty good look as to why these two are currently separated. And as soon as she leaves, Fred gets a call from the New York Times agreeing to take out that damning quote for the story that Mitch was escorted out of the UBA office. But Alex is now with Mitch driving around, and you can tell the chemistry these two have. They're driving around, they're laughing, they're talking about the good old days. And eventually Mitch pulls over the car and says, look, you're not with your husband, and I'm not with my wife, and this is the perfect time to get together. And Mitch is half joking, but half serious. One of those, like he's trying to kind of gauge the room. Alex just laughs, though, and says, yeah, that's just what I need. I need to be with a sexual predator at the moment. But the two end up kissing, and it's only stopped because they get an alert on their phone that the New York Times article is dropped. And it's pretty bad. Now, while that party was going on, Brandi is headed off to meet with her coworkers in a bar downtown. And when she walks in, she starts flirting with the bartender a little bit, but then she finally finds her party, and everybody's shocked she even showed up. And at first, the conversation is fun and jovial, but then it turns into sexual harassment allegations. And to make matters worse, everybody's a little drunk. And when Mitch gets brought up, Mia and Claire kind of go at it, and the conversation gets pretty heated because Mia, unbeknownst to a lot of the people, was very close to the situation. Eventually, it ends with apologies, but the situation definitely got awkward. And Mia ends up leaving for the night. But when she does, that's when they get the alert that the New York Times article is dropped. And all the girls are sitting there reading the story. And while she's reading it, Brandi gets a call from her dad. And she had gotten a call from her dad earlier in the show, but she ignored it. And she decides to call him back, and these two haven't spoken in 15 years. These two don't have a relationship at all, but he's calling to tell her that he's proud of her. She starts crying hearing this, but she says, you can't call me again. You can't do this. And she hangs up the phone and heads back inside. She ends up fucking the bartender that she was flirting with earlier, and then staggers back to her hotel room, where she runs into Corey, who ends up escorting her up to her hotel room. But at this point, everybody in town has read this story, including Mitch Kessler. And Mitch is incensed by one quote from Fred. He'll never work in this town again. So Mitch calls up Fred and says, if I'm going down, you're going down with me. So here's the part where I beg you guys to like this video, subscribe to the channel. There's a button in the top left corner there. And if you don't see the next video for this recap, not to worry, it'll be up soon. And thanks for watching.